Yes, I played a tournament over the weekend and I had many interesting games, including one against a Grandmaster. So, this lesson is for you to learn from my mistakes without having to have that bittersweet experience. Now, the first game that you're going to see, guys, you're going to realize how even if you play with 98% accuracy, brilliant move included, it's not enough to win the game. You're going to see my game against the Grandmaster where the Grandmaster played two brilliant moves back to back. But let's start from the beginning. Actually, we're going to start with my round three. Now, round three, guys, as you can see, my opponent chooses a very interesting move order. And I have to tell you, after the game, my opponent told me he looked for me online, he knew that what I played as black, and he prepared a lot, right? Now, when I'm playing the game, I see bishop f4 and I think, okay, this is going to be more like a London. We've talked about this on lesson 87. So I play knight f6, but then I see knight c3 instead of knight f3. So right now, typically what I play here is d6, right? And many of you have asked, hey, there's someone saying to play this system as white, and then if they play d6, e4, and it transposes into a pierce defense where my opponent is going to just do queen d2, crazy attack on my king, and so on. Now, I had a feeling my opponent was going to be prepared because, among many other things, the tournament was here in Miami, and if he didn't know me, someone else knew me and could have told him what I play as black. So this is why it is good to have something prepared to surprise your opponents. Now, d5, it's not that I had it very well prepared or anything like that. I only knew that after d5, I'll play c6, queen b6, like we do whenever we see this early queenside bishop development, we can try to take advantage of it by hitting the pawn on b2, right? So that's what I played, d5, and check it out, guys. Maybe this is something you want to have in your arsenal for some times, right? So after e3, c6, notice that I'm delaying the king side because I need to hurry up and put pressure on b2, right? So h4, I'm not concerned about that move. So queen b6, putting pressure on b2, and then rook to b1. Typically, they defend the pawn, and then they get ready to play b4 and b5. So after rook b1, I just continue with my development, bishop g7. I'm not that concerned with any attack on the king side because, again, it doesn't look like they're going to castle to the queen side since the rook is already on b1. And if they leave the king in the center, I'm okay with that too, right? So after bishop g7, we got bishop d3, and now I played pawn to h5. Not necessary, but I just wanted to forget about that threat and just continue with my game little by little. Notice that my opponent is delaying knight f3, and I was really waiting for it to just do bishop g4, knight b to d7, castle, rook e8, and finally break on e5. But my opponent, after h5, decided to just go pawn to b4. And now, of course, I need to pay attention to b5, but there's nothing dangerous about it. If they play b5 right now, queen a5, I'm hitting the knight, I get away from the rook, so I should be fine. And worst case scenario, they get to play b5, b takes, I'm going to be fine as well. But of course, I need to consider it. So after b4, I continue with castling. Again, if they try to attack me, their king is in the center, so it's easy for me to put pressure as well. Instead, queen d2. Now, knight b to d7, just continuing with my development. And right now, knight f3. Now, of course, he was waiting so that I couldn't play bishop g4. But now I know what my plan is, guys. My plan is to make e5 work. So thanks to this move h4, my knight could land on g4, they cannot kick me out, and I'm ready to play e5. If I couldn't do it right now, I bring the rook over, but you know, if you've been with me from the beginning, in these hyper-modern openings, we need to strike the center with c5 or e5. So my opponent now castles, he gets the hint, and then finally pawn to e5. Of course, striking the center, hitting the bishop, threatening to play e4, they have to take knight e5, and now my opponent plays bishop e2. So by now, I feel very comfortable. This means nothing. My opponent realizes that I'm making progress. They are doing the opposite. So I decided to take bishop takes. And at this point, I had to make a decision. I wanted to know if I should bring the knight to e5 or if I should develop the bishop to e6 or f5. Pay attention to my dark square bishop, very powerful piece. I need to do the same thing with the other bishop. Now, one principle that we have talked about in this course, guys, is whenever I have two pieces that I want to move and one of them has flexibility, like in this case, I wasn't sure if I wanted my bishop to go to f5 or if I wanted it to go to e6 or if I wanted it to go to g4 at some point, right? The knight, I'm thinking, where's my knight going to go from here? It doesn't seem like I have anything crazy on the king side, and my knight only can go to e5, so there's not much flexibility here. So I'll rather move the knight first and leave the bishop for later to decide after what I'm going to do with it. So at this point, I just went knight e5, hitting the bishop. They're welcome to move the same bishop again, or they could do what my opponent did, which is giving me the pair of bishops. Guys, we talked about this on lesson 111, 112, and from this moment on, I tried to do what we learned on that lesson. Now, if I show you here, notice how the engine is giving me immediately 0.72, 0.60 something, but this is definitely better for the black pieces, and it's mainly because of the pair of bishops. Now, the only thing I need to do, develop this bishop. So my opponent continues with 92. I'm guessing trying to get to d4. And right now, I hope that you guys pause the video and try to come up with your next move, with your plan overall for the black pieces. At this point, I'm looking at a few things. Number one, again, I have the pair of bishops. My pair of bishops is aiming at the king side. We have talked so many times about the pawn structure. My pawn structure is indicating I should be attacking on the king side as well. So my queen is definitely misplaced. If I try to do something on the queen side, my opponent's pawn structure is telling them they should attack here. Their queen and rook are ready for an attack on the queen side. So I know my queen needs to go to the other side. And very quickly, I found a way to transfer my queen over from b6 all the way to f6. So of course, queen d8, very nice at the expense of the pawn. They have to defend it. And then my queen lands on f6. Bishop has to go to g2. And now, of course, it is trying to improve my bishop. So bishop goes to g4, putting pressure on the knight. At some point, I could even go to f3, remove that bishop. So my opponent goes b5. I'm not concerned. Even if they open the file, I can always control it. But also, even if they open it, guys, this is nothing compared to what I have on the king side. Now, at this point, all I'm thinking about is which of my pieces do I need to improve? Well, my bishops are good, my queen is good. I need to improve the rook. So rook f to e8. And this move is very interesting because notice how this bishop is limited on this diagonal. The knight doesn't really have many squares to go to. And if they go to d4, then I could take pawn takes, my rook lands on e2. And if they take with the queen first, I take. The moment the e file opens, I get to the 7th rank. So rook e8, my opponent goes rook b3, and then the other rook that is doing nothing gets to d8. Guys, I don't know about you, but to me, this is like a dream possession. My bishops are well placed, so are the rooks. It is time to open up the game. So after pawn takes, knight c1, number one, I'm happy to see this move. Like, this is a very passive move. Again, I'm improving my pieces. My opponent is doing the opposite. So this tells me my opponent is not comfortable. They don't really have a plan. And of course, if you pause the video, you try to find the best move for black, you have to think of d4. I gotta open up the game. So d4 was played. And if I show you the engine, you're gonna see d4 is a top move, guys. And this is already, we transformed our small advantage with the pair of bishops. We transformed it into 1.96. So after d4, I got queen a5, pawn takes. Forget about pawn takes, because then after queen e7, I'm hitting g3. The king side is just too weak. So rook takes was played. Now bishop d4, defending my pawn, putting pressure on this diagonal. And after rook takes, guys, this is just too much. Now, my opponent plays queen a6. And right here, this is one of the most important moments in the game. Take your time. Really see if you can come up with the next move for black. I personally was thinking, okay, what if I just go bishop b6, the queen cannot take on c6, a7 is controlled, or what if I just go rook e6? I just need to not give my opponent any chances. Well, at some point in there, my brain started to think about rook e1. What if I just go rook e1, and if the rook takes, I'm going to, of course, pick up on f2, check, I collect the rook. If after rook e1, my opponent doesn't take, they don't do anything, I could do queen f2 because the rook is pinned and this is just winning. So at that moment, I start to get excited. And by the way, guys, at this point, my opponent, since I didn't go for his preparation, he had used so much time. He had like less than 5 minutes left. And I'm getting excited. This is going too well. So I look at rook e1 again and I think to myself, Is this necessary? What if I just keep the pressure, let them make mistakes? Well, truth is, I looked at Rook E1 again. I liked it so much. It looked like a brilliant move. And indeed, a brilliant move was Rook E1. Look, evaluation is 314. So I make my move, and then my opponent goes King H2. Now, at this moment, psychologically, I'm just excited. I'm like, okay, I found a great move. I know this is a great move. And it's hard for me to let go. So I continue with Bishop F2. Now, if you look at the engine one more time, I was at 254. When I take on F2, it goes down to 0.26. All I needed to do, guys, was Rook E6, keep the pressure. The problem is that when I take Rook takes, King takes, Knight D3, I just have nothing. Everything evaporates. And this is the difference between us and the next level. We need to calculate, we need to consider everything, evaluate the position, every single move in a game, every single turn. You have to look for the best move. We have to look for the best move every single time. Evaluate and not get ahead of ourselves. So after Knight D3, everything just, you're going to see 0.20, Bishop C3, they take on A7, they got a passed pawn, Bishop F3, and that's another thing. When I realize my advantage is gone, again, psychologically, it affected me. So I go Bishop F3. So after this, it's just not good moves. King G7, Queen F4. Here I'm thinking, well, let me at least wait for them to take me. That way I get to activate the king. But still, as you can see, equal position. I try to activate the king, then Bishop F6 so that the king cannot come over. Trade, King C4, Bishop D4. Now F6, I wanted to play King C4, but if I go King C4, then Knight E5. And of course, I cannot take because the pawn is gone. So F6, the king comes over, I take, and that's it, guys. We just don't have enough pawns. This is just a draw. So this was a painful game, but again, we learned something from the game. If you are in control, you know that you're better, remember to not get ahead of yourself. Just sometimes it's a good idea to continue to put the pressure little by little. And I hope that you also appreciated the value of having another opening, another line to surprise your opponents. You never know, right? Now let's go to round number 1. As you can see here, again, accuracy for the black pieces, 90%. This time we were able to win, but only because my opponent didn't take advantage of my mistake. Now, let me go, guys, from the beginning. My opponent starts with D4, then same-ish variation, and I decided to just play A6. When we talked about the same-ish in our lesson, I think lesson 80-something or 90-something, we talked about the secret weapon. And if you don't know it, you gotta go back to that lesson. And we also talked about C6, A6, and sort of do what we do on the peers against the 150 attack. Well, I played A6 first, and then C6 is the same thing, right? Our goal is to play B5. Now, after Knight G2, E2, this is where you have to make a note, just like I did. I went ahead and simply castled. Against everything I told you on that lesson. I told you, just like in the 150 attack, right? Delay castling, just expand on the queen side only after you castle. Well, here I'm thinking, my opponent played Knight G2, E2. Of course, if they ever go to the queen side, I'm ready to play B5. The queen is not even on D2. And why not castle? Well, turns out that after I castled, my opponent could have continued with that plan and it was not going to be nice. So instead, B5 like we talked about, and you're going to be fine. So I castled, my opponent did Queen D2, B5. Now we have Knight to G3, Knight B to D7, pretty standard. And then after Rook C1, I'm thinking, okay, now I have two main moves to decide on. And guys, feel free to pause the video if you want to try to come up with it as if it were your own game. Now, we have to have at least 3 candidate moves. So my main ones were B4 or B takes E4, but I also considered E5. Now, E5 I disregarded quickly, but then I was between B4 or B takes E4. Now, in the moment, I'm thinking logically, if I pay attention to my pawns on the queen side, I'm expanding there. Also, this knight on G3, I knew that if I created something on the queen side, like B4 and then maybe C5, I open up my bishop, this knight is going to be misplaced. They need to find a way to bring it back into the game. However, right in there, my mind starts to think, what if we just take on C4? And then if the bishop takes, we play D5, pawn takes, knight B6, bishop moves, and then we collect on b5, right? So something like this. Take, d5, take knight b6 in between move, and then knight d5, and we leave our opponent with an isolated queen pawn. We're hitting the bishop on e3. I really liked this position. The only thing that made me hesitate was that I was helping them develop the bishop. So guys, looking back, I would have played b4. So this I know for the next time. However, I went with b takes e4, bishop c4, and after d5, my opponent simply went back to e2. So I said, okay, let me continue to be energetic, king still in the center, but they're just one move away from castling. So they simply took, I took with my knight, castle, and now that the king is on the king side, I'm thinking, okay, when the king was in the center, I was going for it. They moved, okay, so I'm gonna go with h5 to attack on that side. My opponent says, I don't really care, rook f to d1, putting pressure in the center. My knight has f1 now, and I go bishop e6. We finish development, my opponent takes, and I end up with an isolated queen pawn. I was not concerned. I had considered that before, but I knew that my knight could go to c4. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if they did something like, I don't know, just let's say knight f1, well, I could do knight c4, and if they take me, pair of bishops is gone, and now this pawn is fixing the pawn on b2, so I could start putting pressure on it with the rook, the bishop, and so on. Well, my opponent, after c takes d5, my opponent simply played bishop d4, putting pressure on the dark square, so getting ready to remove my bishop. And here I just went knight c4 anyways. Queen c3, and now take your moment here. What would you do next as the black pieces? This was another critical moment for me in the game, and what we played at this point in the game decided the winner. So take your time here. It's black to move. How would you continue? Well, one more time, let me put things in perspective. My opponent at this point also spent a lot of time. I was really comfortable with the time. I had probably like 45 minutes. My opponent had probably 10, 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, I don't want to just trade bishops and get into a drawish position, right? So this, in my mind, I didn't want to go for it. And one of the reasons is that my opponent was low on time. So I started to think, how can I continue to fight for a win? Well, I did bishop h6. And I'm thinking, it's not so bad. The dark squares are not weak. My bishop is still on the board. I'm hitting the rook. But turns out that my opponent could have gotten me in trouble right away. In my mind, if they had taken the knight, well, I could have done rook c8, no big deal. Because if I take with the bishop, then knight e4 is crushing. They're gonna get to f6. This is a lot of trouble for me, right? But then the thing is, even with rook c8, they had queen e1 trying to get to e5 and kill me through the dark squares anyways. So my opponent, luckily for me, blundered here. And after bishop a6, they just played pawn to b3. Still interesting, they wanted me to take the rook. They take back, and the same thing, kill me through the dark squares. Of course, I didn't do it. I have to move my knight at this point, queen a6, and even if I did this, this is just trouble. So my opponent gave me a break. He went b3, knight d6 instead, and now queen b2. At this point, I knew that I was better, but guys, I only had the chance to attack now because my opponent missed his chance. That's not a good thing, right? So, but we live and we learn. So here, I'm already attacking, so h4, finally, knight f1, knight f5, hitting the bishop, and my opponent makes the final mistake, which is bishop f6. Well, at this point, see if you can find the winning continuation for the black pieces. Take your time, and if you think you found it, let me know in the comments the next two moves for the black pieces. Well, of course, I went queen b6, hitting that king through the dark squares, but then when they moved, I spent some time deciding between queen f2 and pawn to h3. Should I expose the king first, or should I bring the queen in first? Well, it turns out that bishop c1 was also a candidate move, very strong, but I was like, I'm not gonna give up my bishop yet. So instead, I went with the worst of the top three moves. So if you look over here, h3 was the best move, bishop c1, second best move, and then winning by 3.40 still, we got queen f2. Now, queen f2, I'm thinking, I'm ready to play bishop e3, threatening mate. If they take me, I take back, threatening mate, and also h3 is always in the air. So my opponent plays rook c2, h3, I'm threatening mate, so this is not even possible. mate. So my opponent plays pawn takes, now bishop e3, threatening mate, knight takes, hitting the rook and threatening mate. Rook has to come over to defend. Bishop h3, threatening checkmate. So my opponent has to play bishop d1. And don't forget, they also have to defend this pawn. And the best thing about this position for me now is that when I take the rook, my opponent cannot take with the bishop because I take on f3. So they had to come in, allow me to trade queens, and now this is just too easy to play for the black pieces. Important, I have talked about this so many times. Notice how we were attacking, and yes, we want to checkmate the king, but many times we force him to give us material, and that's okay with me too. They gave me the exchange. Now all I'm thinking is simplify, go to the end game. Now let me show you how the game continued. I'm thinking activate the rook. My opponent says no. I get to e3 anyways. Then bring the other rook, ready to checkmate or at least simplify the rooks. My opponent moves the king over. I could have easily played rook e1, but I said, you know what? Let me get the pawn with a tempo, then hit the bishop, a5, rook d4, pinning the bishop. Of course, be careful with any discovery checks. So bishop f2, check, bishop g3, and now if there's a pin piece, we want to add more pressure to it. Now bishop f1, and of course in my mind, simplification. So I traded, king takes, d4, rook d3, again, simplification, and now f4, check, give me the pawn, check, give me the pawn, and after rook c2, my opponent simply resigned. Now guys, main takeaway from here, from the very beginning, don't castle so prematurely. We knew this from before, but now reinforcement, just b5, delay castling, and of course, calculate and don't get ahead of yourself. Even if you are ahead in time, even if your opponent is lower rated, don't push because that's when we get in trouble, right? If the game is just leading to a draw, okay, keep going in that way. Don't risk too much because it could be painful. So with that said, we're getting closer to the Grandmaster game, but first we gotta go to round number 2. And here you can see 80-something% for both of us. Interestingly, we both played a brilliant move. And for this one, I'm not gonna show you the entire game. If you wanna see the entire games, let me know in the comments and I will give you access to these games, right? But at this point, my opponent had just played bishop f5, which is a mistake, hitting the pawn. I simply go h3, knight goes to the edge, not good. Queen f2, defending and attacking. And now we get queen d7, putting pressure on h3. Now, at this point in the game, what would you have played? Well, I hope that you paused the video. I hope that you thought of activating with the tempo on the queen, of course, queen c8, and now king h2. So far so good, but now my opponent plays knight b4. Okay, if you're playing a tournament game, you get to this position, how would you continue? Well, I remember when we talked about the Collie system, I told you, we talked about this idea, right? So I'm thinking, my pawn is being attacked. Well, what if I defend it with the rook? It looks ugly, but then when I kick the knight out, I just improve my rook again and I'm fine, right? Also, knight e1 is an option, but then my mind started to look into bishop e3. And if you didn't consider it before when you post the video, look into it now. Well, let me tell you what I was thinking without moving the pieces. I was thinking bishop e3, if knight c2, then I got knight d5, hitting, threatening this fork. And after rook e8, I have rook c1, knight takes, queen takes. And guys, I simply liked that position a lot. Yes, I dropped the pawn, I gave my pair of bishops, but I got a knight on d5. Rook's just too active, and I really liked that position. I gave a pawn for activity. Now, when I analyzed this with the engine says knight e1 is the top move, point 96, knight g5, or rook d2 as well. When I played bishop e3, it goes back to equal. So knight c2, knight d5, then rook e8, rook a to c1, knight e3, queen e3. Again, this is what I had pictured, and I really like this position. I'm hitting c5, so my opponent plays b6. Now, if there's a pin piece, we add more pressure to it. Bishop e6, pawn takes, bishop d5, rook d5, b takes c5. And right now, I'm curious to know, would you have taken on c5 with this rook or with this rook? Well, I was this close to capturing with this rook. I like this so much. And then I could even go with both rooks to the seventh rank, but I convinced myself to just keep it standard. So double up the rooks, queen a6, and then knight g5. We continue to put pressure on the king. Discovery on the rook, knight is hitting f7, so the rook moved, and now, of course, rook to the seventh rank. After the rook gets to the seventh rank, my opponent takes the pawn, I take on a7, getting ready to double up my rooks, and then we get knight f5. Now here I start to get a little bit concerned because I'm thinking, I need to move my queen somewhere where it is not too passive. And I need to be careful with the pawn on f4. I need to be careful with the rook joining as well. Of course, I know that anywhere I put my queen, they have to move their queen as well. So I'm thinking, I'm going to go queen c5. If queen d2, hitting my pawn, getting ready to bring the rook down, I have queen c4, defending, and then queen c4. So I went queen c5, queen d2, queen c4, and then here my opponent played his brilliant move. If I go back here, you're going to see that the brilliant move was actually queen g2. Now, for me, let me see. For me, the brilliant move was this knight d5. But then if we just go back here, you're going to see that queen g2, very interesting. He probably was thinking knight e3 and then third range checkmate, but there was not enough time. So he changed the move order. Take, knight e3, they take, and then take. Now, to be honest, I was happy with this position. Look at my knight compared to this knight. Look at my rooks compared to his rooks, especially after my opponent here played pawn to f5. This is already completely winning. My rooks are completely open. I got a protected pass pawn. And one more time, here my opponent was low on time. I had like probably 15 minutes. My opponent had probably 3 minutes. And guys, yes, I made it a priority to not get low on time. So one of the main things I was doing is logical moves, just play them, don't overthink. The opening, I played systems that I'm familiar with, so I was not spending a lot of time in the opening. So after f5, very easy from this moment on, double up the rooks, check, I get out the way, take on a7, I'm going to f6, so check, check, and then of course they have to give me the rook. At this point, they take, I go check. Honestly, I should have done, at this moment, I should have played, I think I played rook h7, but I should have done check, check, and then rook h7. That way they don't have bishop e5. Now I played this move right away because I calculated after they take the pawn, then I have check and I collect the bishop. Now here my opponent resigned. They are in a lot of trouble, and the main takeaway here is, again, be patient, look at your candidate moves, and do not get into unnecessary complications, okay? So rethink, make sure that you don't give your opponent any counterplay. I know that I tell you all the time, but it is a different thing when you are sitting at the board, there's pressure, there's so much going on. We have to stay disciplined, guys. So with that said, let's go to my game against the Grandmaster. Very interesting game. And again, my opponent played two brilliant moves back to back. That's impressive. So here is that game. So at this point, guys, this is the most interesting thing about this game. At this point, after I played bishop e3, I'm hitting the pawn on c5. Now, this is theory. This is well known to be uncomfortable for the black pieces if they allow me to get into this variation, and he did. And then, look, this is a classical game. So we're starting with 90 minutes, plus we get 30-second increment. Now, on move number 8, my opponent started to spend time and spend time. And his clock went all the way down from 90 minutes to 30-something minutes. Imagine playing a Grandmaster, move number 8, he has like 30 minutes left. That's nice, right? Well, my opponent ends up playing queen d6. It cannot be good, right? So here they have e4, but we have knight g5. If they take, we take on f7. This I knew from before, so good for me. They could play knight d4, but he plays queen d6. And I'm thinking, okay, this is just nice for my knight. Don't forget, the threat sometimes is more powerful than the execution, so no rush. c3, my opponent plays knight f6, and now queen a4, guys. The idea, pinning the knight, so I might just take on e5 when I hit the queen, knight c4, then we take on e5. But also, I need to continue to put pressure on c5. So queen a3 is a very cool idea. So queen a4, queen a3, and if they play b6, look at this diagonal. Now, if you look at the engine, again, 165, my opponent plays bishop d7, and it goes all the way to 2.86. Guys, 311 against the Grandmaster. 11 moves in. My opponent has now less than 20 minutes. At this point, of course, I played knight c4, hitting the queen, queen e7, queen a3, forget about b6, and my opponent plays bishop f8. This is really, really painful. My opponent is even lower in time. This is move number 14. We're winning by 326. The question to you now is, what would you have played? Take your time, please, and let me know in the comments what you have done at this moment. Well, one more time, I'm thinking rook e1 makes sense. Then I move my bishop, e4, strike the center. My opponent has to be uncomfortable. But then I look at this move, guys, knight e5. Now, I calculated knight takes, queen e5, bishop f4, queen moves, bishop b7. I get 2 pawns for the knight. If the rook leaves to d8, bishop c7, so I also get the exchange. So I'm giving 2 pieces for the rook, but I get 2 pawns, and their king is still in the center, and my opponent is really low on time. Looking back, what I should have done is realize my opponent is low on time, just play it cool. Don't give your opponent any counterplay. Just rook a to e1, continue to squeeze. This is what they do to us, right? Well, I got ahead of myself, and I took on e5, and guys, I remember thinking, this is going to be a brilliant game. So my ego got to me, which is not always a bad thing, but in this case, it was just painful. So he takes bishop f4, queen e6, bishop b7, and now my Grandmaster opponent pulled a very powerful, brilliant move. If we look at the brilliant moves, the first one was queen b6, hitting my bishop and threatening to do a discovered check and discover attack at the same time. Painful, painful, painful. So I said, no problem. I'm going to go queen b3. I'm away from this attack, and I'm defending the bishop. Well, my opponent pulled another brilliant move. What do you think it was? Well, if you paused the video and you found it, congrats. The move was bishop b5. Forget about the threat of queens, and I'm still hitting the bishop, and I'm still threatening to get your queen. Guys, when I saw that bishop b5, a feeling that I hadn't had in years came to me. It's like electricity just coming down from your hair all the way down to your feet. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this move. Well, anyhow, I went and look at this. If I go back and I show you the evaluation, it went to negative 1.30, right? Well, look at this. I continue with c4. Then I take on b5, queen d5, trying to trade pieces. And the first thing that came to mind was, okay, I cannot trade queens. But then I'm thinking, if I'm going to lose, at least I'm going to play energetically. So I played e4, king in the center. We know we need to go for that king. Take, queen b3, a takes b3, and at least I get a semi-open file to put pressure. b6 is coming. If they take, well, we pin the knight. So knight d7, I go pawn e5. Look, now it's 0.30, bishop e7, e6, 0.0. So I'm feeling good here again. And now bishop c7. Equal position, knight d5. I go back with a tempo, rook f8, and now rook f to d1. At this point, guys, I'm getting back in the game. My opponent plays knight b6, bishop c7. Thanks to my open or semi-open file, I'm threatening to take here, bishop d8, and we get to this critical moment. Again, evaluation 0.0. My opponent low on time. Candidate moves that came to mind, of course, rook a7, bishop d8, bishop b6. But there's one move that I had seen even from before. I was like, if we get to this position, I like e7. And I looked at it again, and it seemed to me like a great move, a brilliant move, because I'm thinking, if they take here now, skewer. If they take here, I take the rook. If they take with the bishop, I take the knight. But it turns out, guys, that e7, as good as it is, 0.08, this is equal. My opponent took, I took on f8, I'm feeling good again. But the simplest way, guys, the easier to play for white would have been, instead of e7, rook takes, then rook takes, then rook f8, and then take on b6. And this is an endgame that I just cannot lose this. There's no way I'm going to lose it. It's equal, but easier to play, I think, for the white pieces. Now, with my variation, we got to this position, I got the pawn, and I'm thinking, there's no way that this, even if he's a grandmaster, that he could turn this around. Even if he's doing a training exercise, he cannot turn this around. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to let go of this. Two minor pieces for the rook, but I got more pawns, and I just couldn't see this not ending in a draw at least. Well, truth is that by now, in order for me to turn things, get back on track, I had to use a lot of my time. We both were low on time. I still had more time, but I was still low. And you're going to see how my opponent just outplays me. So rook c2. And by the way, guys, this game, not as an excuse, it was, the game went all the way to 11 p.m. It was really late. So that's my excuse. So I'm moving my king, just h4, trying to make progress. Rook d3, keeping my pieces on light squares. Then rook d2, king h3, g4, bishop e7. And then here, my opponent plays rook c1. I was low on time, and I remember thinking, just play g5. If anything, rook f7 is in the air. But then I just played rook e2. The engine is saying, just rook f1, keep it simple. And you're still threatening to go to f7. I ended up doing rook e2, and then my opponent gets this pawn. And guys, I'm not going to go too deep into it because this was just my opponent showing me his Grandmaster ID, telling me, look, I'm a Grandmaster, and just because of that, I'm going to defeat you. So check. I go around, h5, h6, thinking at some point I could go after the pawn, but of course not. Look at this. The main thing for you to realize at this point, or to pay attention to, is how my opponent has his pieces working together. King, the minor pieces, the rook is defending, my pieces are having a hard time to keep up. So bishop b2, another pawn is gone, and everything is just collapsing. Knight f7, you see the bishop take the pawn, the knight controls over here. His pieces are just too good right now. And king e6, everything is working together. Look, bishop defends the knight, rook defends, bishop defends the king. And then at this point, we played for a few more moves, but if you look at the evaluation, it's already 5.60. So guys, huge experience for me, so it's not gonna happen again. This is why we go to tournaments. This is what it takes to become a more experienced, a better player.